Good day, everyone. Welcome to Reading and Writing. For our last lesson for this semester, we will be talking about business and office correspondence. So, for today, we will be discussing what a business correspondence is, its definition, its purposes, and its importance, as well as its different forms and the things that we need to consider whenever we are writing one. We will also be discussing how to write memos, emails, and letters. Now, before we begin, let's try to define the word correspondence first. Correspondence basically refers to any written or digital communication that is exchanged by two or more parties. It is often something that is used to communicate with another company or another person in a formal or in a more professional setting. Business correspondence, on the other hand, is a form of a written exchange that is used to support all business or office processes. It is something that is communicated within the business, within the company, or the business communicating with someone outside the company. So, and everything is all about the business, all about the organization, how to go about things in that particular place or in that particular company or organization. There are two main types of business correspondence. So we have internal correspondence and external correspondence. Let's go first and discuss what an internal correspondence is. When we say internal correspondence, this only means that it's a form of correspondence within the organization or the company or an institution. It is done by the people who are employed in that particular company or who are members of that particular organization. Whereas external correspondence is simply a type of communication that is used to communicate with people outside that particular organization or company. So it could be another business, a person from another organization. It could be a prospective partner or stakeholder, as long as it's someone who is outside the current setup of the company or organization, we are going to be using an external form of correspondence to communicate with them in a professional manner. Now, there are many reasons as to why we write correspondence within the organization, office, or company and outside the organization, office, or company. When we are writing correspondence within the organization, office, or company, it actually lends a meaning of definiteness to our corporate policies. So, like what I have mentioned earlier, it's a form of communication that is aligned to the rules and regulations that are mandated by the policies of that particular organization. That means that any type of correspondence that is happening should follow or adhere to the policies that have been set before it. Not only that, it also promotes understanding between the members and the department, since it's something that is occurring, something that is sent between the members of the company or between the teams, among the teams of the company, then definitely understanding will go after it. Okay, because if something is written in a formal manner, then that means that the approach is professional as well. Therefore, misunderstanding and miscommunication can be mitigated. Now, as for correspondence with outsiders or people outside the company, there are several reasons as to why we write them as well, or there are several purposes as to why we write them as well. All right, first thing, it also promotes image of the organization. When you have a very clear, well-constructed external correspondence, it reflects on how your company is being run, how your company is being managed. Okay, because like earlier, if within the company it already reflects your company's policies, what more when it is being sent outside your company. An image, if it's a well-constructed correspondence, definitely the image of your organization will also be positively regarded. Next, it clarifies its policies. So it's a form of clarification as well, because it's a written communication. It's like a document. Okay. So if you are communicating with outsiders, it informs them. It tells them that for this setup, for our organization, this is how it goes. All right. And it is communicated in such a way that it's professional and formal. Another thing that business correspondence with outsiders do is that it keeps legal entities intact. Like what I have mentioned earlier, it's an official document. So whatever happens, it will serve as a physical manifestation of whatever has been between talked about between the parties. So it could be used as legal documents. Correspondence also keeps its operations going. So it keeps the operations of a particular business going, because we use it to communicate, to find partnerships, or to establish relationships with other people outside the organization. There are also many different purposes of writing business correspondence or engaging in business correspondence. First is that it serves as a notice. So, for example, if you have an employee who's not doing or who's not performing well in his job, then a memo or a formal letter may be used to inform that particular employee about his misconduct or his wrongdoing. So it might serve as a notice. Aside from that, you may also use a form of business correspondence. Take, for example, if you want to announce new policies on your company, or any other formal announcements that you know would greatly impact how your organization or how the company is going to be working. Next, it may also serve as an order. If you want your employees to follow certain things, take for example the new policies that have been set forth, all right, and you want them to do things on a particular or in a particular manner, then you can use a form of business correspondence to serve the order. Aside from that, business correspondence may also serve instruction. It informs you. Therefore, it gives you new knowledge about certain things going on in the business, in the organization, in the company. So it teaches you something as well. It gives you new knowledge that you can use to further your skills or to advance the information that you already know about that particular business or particular company. Next, we have the different importance of correspondence. The first thing that we have to remember is that whenever we engage in business correspondence or in any type of correspondence in general, it basically helps us to maintain a proper relationship to whoever we are communicating with. Since it's very formal in nature, it lessens the fear in us of offending the other party. Okay, because it's very formal, it's professional, it's written in a professional manner, it's written in a formal manner. Therefore, any other biases that you have should be taken away from that particular correspondence. Since it will also, or it can also serve as a legal document and strengthen the legal identities of a particular company or institution, a business correspondence, any form of business correspondence may also serve as evidence. Okay, it may serve as evidence that you have communicated this one already. Therefore, by default, it is understood that once they have received that particular memo, take for example, or acknowledge the receipt of a particular email, therefore, it is implied that they have also read and understood all that is stated in that particular form of correspondence. Earlier, we have mentioned that it helps maintain a proper relationship. Now, when you maintain a proper relationship, you also create and maintain goodwill. It's a good relationship between two parties. Business correspondence are also very inexpensive and convenient. Why? Because right now, with the digital age, with the advent of technology, it has become very easy or easier for us to to communicate with other people within and outside our organization or our company. Take, for example, you can only send memos or emails all throughout your um, all throughout your company or organization with just a click of a button. So it's very inexpensive, and anytime within the working hours of the day, you can send it and they would be able to receive it right away. Next, like what I have mentioned again, it's a formal communication. So it has a professional nature to it. It also helps in the expansion of business because business correspondence is what we use to communicate with other people. And like I have mentioned earlier, if it's written or well constructed, then it will reflect positively on the image of your business or in the image of your company. All right. So if other people was able to read your business correspondence and it had a positive impact on them, it might convince them to join your company or maybe invest in your organization or help you out as you have requested on your correspondence with them, and so on and so forth. So there are many different ways in which a business correspondence can help you in the expansion of your business. So what are the different forms of business correspondence? There are actually a lot, but we would be focusing on some of it towards the end of my discussion. All right, the first basic form of business correspondence is of course letters. So you write business letters. You can also write emails. Emails within the company, especially those email addresses that include the name of the company as your domain, then they are considered to be a form of business correspondence. Okay, that's why as you would notice in larger companies, their emails are strictly monitored because all of the emails coming in and going out of that particular email address is actually a form or is considered a form of business correspondence. Next, you also have text messages. Text messages are also considered as a form of business correspondence, especially if this is the only means to communicate with other people within the organization or outside the organization. Next, you can also have memos as a form of business correspondence. Voice emails are usually considered or are also considered as a form of business correspondence. You have notes. We can also send postcards. And of course, I'm not quite sure if businesses are still using it, but we also have fax messaging for as a form of business correspondence. Here are some of the things that you have to consider when you are writing and sending a business correspondence. The first thing that you have to consider is the destination. Where are you going to be sending this particular form of business correspondence? Next is, of course, the format. What type of formatting are you going to be using? Okay, that would include the font style that you are using, your pagination, your margins, your font size, and so on and so forth. You also need to consider the audience. Who would be reading this particular business correspondence? Is it gonna be a CEO of a company? Is it gonna be your employees? Is it gonna be business partners? Is it gonna be stakeholders? And so on and so forth. Because different people, all right, requires different kinds of or different forms of business correspondence. So it would really depend on whom are you gonna be sending it to. Okay, next is memos. These are considered attachments as well because sometimes you need to write a business correspondence when you are also writing memos. Okay, that is a special way to communicate what is written in the memo as well. All right, you also need to consider the tone. How, if you read it, if someone reads it, how are they going to be perceiving it? Is it written in a formal manner? Is it written in a casual yet still professional way, and so on and so forth? You also need to think about the security. How secured is your message? Is it sensitive in nature? Are the information included in your business correspondence deemed private or confidential? So you have to consider the security as well. Is it okay for you to send it via email where your IT could access it? Is it safe to forward documents with a letter using the courier? So there are many things that you also have to consider in terms of security. But you need to make sure, you need to always know, determine the level of confidentiality, the level of privacy that it entails. All right, or the information included in your business correspondence entails even before thinking about how to send it. Next, your attachments as well, like what I have mentioned earlier. Sometimes there are things that you have to include to make your or to ensure that your letter or your business correspondence has a sense to it. So it could be memos, it could be documents, it could be supporting files. All right, so different types of attachment. You also need to consider the length. Is it long enough to be read in a span of minutes, or is it too short? Does it seem too informal if it's too short, or does it seem too boring if it's too long? So think about the length and always consider being brief and concise whenever writing business correspondence, because as much as possible, you have this thinking in your mind that whoever is gonna read this will be doing something else after. Okay, so it's not always gonna be top priority unless it's stated on your correspondence, all right? But more often than not, it is expected that business correspondence are stated briefly and concisely, direct to the point, straight to the point, without any other non-pertinent details included to it. So next thing that you have to think about is the speed or delivery time. How fast is it gonna get to your audience? How quickly is it gonna reach your audience? Okay, so what is the best possible way to send it in terms of delivery time or in terms of speed? Last but not the least, of course, is the topic that you are going to be discussing in your business correspondence, or basically what's the purpose. Why are you even sending that email in the first place? Why are you even writing that memo in the first place? Okay, so consider that thing as well. Now, how do you choose? There are way too many different forms of correspondence. So how do we choose which one to use? First, always consider your purpose. What is your main purpose? Is it just to communicate certain things? Take, for example, you just want to invite them for a meeting, or you just want to send a new policy or to communicate a new policy to your employees, and so on and so forth. So you have to determine the purpose, because the purpose as well that will determine the level of formality, the level of professionalism, or the level of professionalism that would be used in writing that particular business correspondence. So think about your purpose and think about your audience. Who is gonna read this? If your employees read this, what would they think of you? If your business partner would read this, what would he or she think of you? How would it reflect your company? How would it reflect your organization? So you need to carefully choose the form of correspondence that you are going to use based on these two criteria, the purpose and the audience. Now let's go to how do we write business correspondence? How can we write any form of business correspondence? Let's go first to writing a memo, because this is basically the most common type of business correspondence that is circulated amongst employees, amongst organization members, and so on and so forth. So a memo is basically a document that is sent within an organization. So let me reiterate on that again. A memo is a document that is sent within an organization. It's usually referred to as an in-house correspondence or an in-house letter. Now, we do this because we want to do certain things within the organization itself. Take, for example, we want to pass along or request certain pieces of information. You can write a memo about it. You want to communicate or outline policies. You need to present short reports, or even do a topic or idea proposal, then a memo is the best way to go. Now, there are different parts to a memo. So when you are writing a memo, you need to consider these things as well. You have your header block, which includes the recipient of the memo, the sender of the memo, who are the what is the subject of the memo, what is the memo all about, okay, and then the date it was written. You also need to include, of course, write your message, and then you need to include your signature if you are the one writing the memo. Usually memos are coming from HR departments, human resources departments, or management committees, or executive committees, or from the president of the companies, a part of the organization that is basically in charge of communicating to the employees or to the members of the organization. More often than not, the people who are in charge of those teams are the ones who are going to be signatories of a memo. Now, how do you write a memo? First is your subject line. Write your focus and the topic for the subject line. So on the subject line, it's basically what is the memo going to be all about. And then don't forget to write your introduction. Write one or two clear introductory sentences by answering the question, what is the memo all about, and why are we writing this particular memo, or why are you sending this particular memo to them? Next, your discussion. It must respond with the reporter's question. In writing a discussion, you need to make sure that your information is accessible to your readers. So how do you do that? How do we make the relevant information, the most important pieces of information, accessible to our readers right away? Okay, you can do this by applying highlighting techniques, such as, of course, using bold fonts, using italics, okay, or using bullet points to highlight important details or pertinent details of the memo. Or maybe you can just literally highlight certain things on it. Next, your conclusion. You can conclude with either a number one, a complimentary close, something that will motivate readers and leave them happy, or a directive close. It tells the readers exactly what you want them to do next or provide dated action. So a complimentary close is basically just thank you, God bless, may this be of use to you, something like that. Whereas a directive close is something that is, as it tells, it's as if you are indicating an action. You want your readers to do certain things. So take for example, once received, please reply with blah 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 blah, and so on and so forth. So these are the two types of conclusion that you can use whenever you are writing a memo. Some additional tips whenever you write: you can use parenthetical definitions for your audience. If you have included, take for example, if you have included an unfamiliar term, okay, but that is very useful to the content or to the meaning that you are trying to relay, okay, you can use parenthetical definitions for your audience. And this is in order for them to better understand the information that you have just presented. To avoid this, okay, if you don't want to do this, it's best that you just use simple words, readable sentences, and specific details. You don't have to include non-pertinent information. If it's not related to the idea or the topic of the memo itself, then there is no need to include that in your discussion. You can also write in informal, however, it has to be a friendly tone, okay? Because when we say friendly, there is still a level of formality between communicator and the listeners, okay, or the receivers of the correspondence. So basically, it's still formal but casual in nature. Do not forget to always use proper grammar before even sending your memos. Then you always need to double check if it's written in correct syntax, using the correct syntax, using the correct grammar, using the correct spelling, and basically following all the basic rules and the language used. Now let's move forward to writing emails. Emails are simply messages that are distributed through electronic means. Okay, so we do this by using a computer, okay, to send a message from one user to one or probably even more recipients via a network. Okay, so it's a network that is online. It's something that we do online. So email is basically a short term for electronic mail. Although emails may have an informal feel to it, remember that when used for business, it needs to convey professionalism and respect. Okay, so sometimes our tendency is that we, especially for students, you guys, more likely whenever you write an email addressed to a teacher, for example, there's a tendency for you to take it as if, to consider writing an email as if you are just simply writing a text message or writing a personal chat to your recipients, but that shouldn't be the case. Emails are forms of business correspondence or formal correspondence. Okay, so you need to make sure that whenever you write it, it is something that could be read in front of an audience. Okay, so you always assume that your email is not just something that is read by your by your direct recipient. Okay, it is something that could be read by anyone else inside the organization, inside the company. Okay, because like what I have mentioned earlier, even an IT team could access the emails of other people within a specific organization. So as someone who will be sending an email, okay, whether you're a member of the organization or someone outside the organization, then you need to ensure that it still conveys professionalism and respect. Okay, just always imagine that someone else will be reading this as well. Let's go to the different parts of an email. When you open up your email, for example, Google Mail or Yahoo Mail, then this is what it's basically looking like. All right, so you have there your recipients, and then you also have your CC. Actually, CC and BCC are also considered recipients. However, CC and BCC stand for certain things. Okay, so CC is a carbon copy. It stands for carbon copy. Therefore, the recipient that you are going to include in this particular line on CC, okay, your original recipient or your main recipient will or your carbon copy recipient will also receive the same thing that you have sent your original or intended recipient, okay? And your intended recipient will also see that someone else received the email, the same email, okay? However, BCC is what we refer to as blind carbon copy. If you send someone, if you wrote the email address on BCC and you sent the same email to a BCC, okay, blind carbon copy. You sent a blind carbon copy. Your intended recipient, the person that you are supposedly sending it to, will not know that you have sent it to someone else, okay, or you sent a copy to someone else. So that's basically the difference between the two. Then also never ever forget to write something on the subject line. Your subject line is basically what the email is all about. So write it down. If it's about a company policy, write it down. If it's about a letter of resignation, write it down. If it's a request for a leave, write it down. Next, your message or your body. This has to be like what I have mentioned, and I have to reiterate it once more. It has to be written in a professional manner. Now, your message or body should also include your signature. Your signature is basically your signature. It's how you close your email addresses, and it could be set by default on your particular email domain or email provider. Moving on, how do we write an email? The first thing that you have to do is recognize your audience. Who are you going to be writing it to? Remember that first and foremost. Then always identify yourself at the beginning of your email after you have greeted your recipient. Good day, good morning. I am blank, and state the reason why you are writing that email in the first place. Ensure that the email address that you have input on the receiving line should have the correct email address. Always make sure that you are sending it to the correct email address. So right now, the technology allows us to determine this one already, because sometimes it will not the email will bounce back if the incorrect email address has been used. You also need to remember that you need to write an effective subject line. By effective subject line, we just mean that you need to go directly, state right away the purpose of the email. If it's gonna be about a company policy, write a company policy on the subject line. If it's gonna be about your resignation, then write it's about your resignation, and so on and so forth. Go direct to the point, because that's the best way to make sure that it is an effective one. And of course, since it's an email, nobody wants to read a long email. Always keep your messages brief. Try to limit it to, if it has to be a long email, try to limit it to one paragraph or two paragraph email. You also need to make sure that you organize your email. By email, that means that your entire inbox, okay? So organizing your inbox could also help you write better emails in the future. Use highlighting techniques only when it is necessary. If it doesn't have to be bold, since you don't think it's important or relevant, and you don't need to do it, okay? And make sure that you write in a format that is consistent. Okay, if you take for example, if you use a particular font, then stick to that particular font. If you use one font size, then use to that particular font size. Always proofread your email. Check for grammar lapses, spelling lapses, punctuation mark lapses, etc., etc. And of course, practice netiquette. By netiquette, we mean, okay, sometimes, or actually not sometimes, but a lot of times, students tend to forget that emails are formal communication, formal forms of communication. Therefore, it should only be sent during work hours, okay? So take for example, you forgot. So usually work hours are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's the ideal time for you to send, receive, and communicate through an email, because by 5 p.m., it is understood that people are leaving the office already, leaving the company or ending their workday. Okay, therefore, they are not supposed to be addressing any other forms of business correspondence, okay, or any other forms of company correspondence. So what do we do? Take, for example, you were able to read it late by 7 p.m. and you want to respond to it right away because you have a tendency to forget. What you can do is always schedule that email. Just schedule it for delivery the next day. Okay, so that's what I tend to do. For personally, that's what I do. If I want to respond to an email right away, but I cannot send it during work hours because it's already past work hours, okay? So I cannot send it basically. Now what I do is I schedule the email. I schedule it to be sent the next day by 8 a.m. the following day. Last but not the least, let's talk about business letters. Okay, business letters are, I'm sure you are all familiar with this one because these are the things that we have done before. Okay, when you write your excuse letter, that's a form of an official correspondence. Okay, and when you write other letters that are concerning, take for example, you want to change your majorship or you want to change your strand, okay, you want to request for a document from the office, you write formal letters. And business letters are technically the same. So letters are simply brief messages that are usually sent to recipients that are often outside the organization. All right, so these are messages that we want to send to people outside the organization, or we want to certain information that we want to communicate to people outside the organization. These are usually printed using a letterhead paper that basically represents your business or organization. So it includes the logo of the company, the logo of the organization, because it's representative of the institution itself. Business letters don't have to be long. They are generally limited to 1 or 2 pages because they are supposed to be brief. It's not a personal letter wherein you have to discuss everything in detail. Okay, usually if you need to discuss everything in detail, you include a request for it on your letter. Okay, now if you want to learn more about this, you may contact me through this, blah, 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 something like that. Now, there are many different forms of letters or business letters. It could be a letter of inquiry, a cover letter, which we have talked about in an earlier discussion, which is used to accompany a resume. A letter of good news. Take, for example, promotion or maybe partnership, okay? Confirmation of partnership, something like that. It could also be a letter of bad news, resignation, you are trying to fire an employee, something like that. Complaints could also be communicated through official letters. Similarly, adjustments like promotion or changes in the company setup could be communicated through a letter. And then sales as well could be communicated through a letter. Now let's take a look at the different parts of a business letter. So first and foremost, we have there the letterhead. This is sometimes already printed on the paper that you are going to be using. Okay, but if it's a digital copy, then you might need to add this or use your company mandated letterhead. It usually includes the sender's address, which is basically the address of the company. And then do not forget to include the date. When did you write this particular letter? You need to include an inside address, or what we also call the recipient's address. To whom are you going to be writing this letter for? And then, of course, your salutation, the body, the information that you are communicating, and your complimentary close. Please feel free to contact me, blah, 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 blah. And then close it with sincerely yours, respectfully yours, something like that. And then you need to, of course, to include your signature over your type name. Now, how do we write a letter? I know for sure that some of you are already familiar with writing a formal letter or a business letter. So these are simply a reiteration of what you already know. All right. First thing that you have to do is your language should always be clear, concise, specific, and respectful. Next, ensure that each word you are using is contributing to the purpose of your letter. If it's unnecessary, do not include it. You don't need to use flowery words. Go straight to the point, discuss your information, and end it. That's it. Each paragraph that you are writing or including in your business letter should only focus on one particular idea. Similarly, the parts of your letter should form a complete message. Okay, so even if there are different ideas presented in each paragraph, all of these ideas, main ideas, when connected together, should form one complete message. And then, of course, a letter should always be free from errors. Okay, so avoid, again, check for grammar lapses, check for spelling errors or spelling mistakes, and then check for punctuation marks if you are using punctuation marks, and so on and so forth. Even formatting could also affect how you write your letter. So you need to make sure that the physical format of your letter is pleasing to the eyes. Okay, it's something that could easily be read by your recipient. Last but not the least, here are just a few reminders whenever we are writing a business correspondence. Always think about the purpose and the audience before even deciding on the correspondence type. Determine if it's within the organization or if it's with people outside of the organization. Or who are you specifically going to be talking to? Who are you specifically going to be sending this message to? Remember to always follow the 3-step writing process. Pre-write, write, and then rewrite. This enables you to check for lapses in grammar, lapses in spelling, and of course, to determine which is really the important parts or which are the important aspects of your business correspondence that should be included or that are necessary to be included in your letter or in your memo or in your email. And then write it down. Then after it, check it again, check it once again, and then rewrite it before even sending it to your intended recipient. Next, ask your colleagues as well, supervisors, or even your subordinates if they know better to assist you. Because there's no harm in asking for help. There's no harm in asking a question to clarify something, especially when you are engaging in something that is this formal, something that is of professional nature. Thank you for listening. Here are my sources and references for this lecture.